Hello everyone, my name is Rosie, I use they them pronouns, and welcome to my channel. I am a music journalist. I have been working in the industry as either a journalist or a music publicist for nearly 5 years. I've written for the likes of The Wire, The Guardian, Metal Hammer, Kerrang, and others. And I wanted to start this channel as a way for me to talk more casually about the releases that might not fit in any of those publications that I mentioned previously. I listen to a lot of quite fringe, experimental, kind of weird music from all around the world. And sometimes those releases don't necessarily fit in any of those publications that I mentioned before for whatever reason. And yeah, I'm hoping that this can be a place where we can just chat about music, we can share recommendations. I'm hoping to provide recommendations for music that maybe you haven't seen everywhere online, that your friends haven't heard of. I think that sometimes in the era of streaming that's kind of hard to do. I think the algorithm learns what you like and feeds you more of the same. So I really hope that with this channel this can be a fun and easy and casual way for you to discover new music from all around the world to diversify your listening. Now, obviously, this is my first video. I'm probably going to get some stuff wrong, but if you guys have any feedback, I'd really love to hear it in the comments below. Please be nice and respectful, or else I will block you. And I'd also love to know if you end up listening to any of these albums, if there's any specific genres or scenes that you'd like me to talk about. I literally spend my free time and much of my work life as well researching music and researching things like scenes and music from specific countries and genres and periods of time. So I would love some ideas of things that we can dive deeper into together. Seeing as I'm just starting out, I'm hoping to make maybe one of these videos every month, but I'd love to make more if there is interest for them, so please do let me know what it is that you would be interested in watching. And yeah, if you just want to say hi, if you fancy subscribing, that would be really nice. Please give me a thumbs up if you like this video as well, as it helps with the algorithm. And so yeah, without further ado, let's get into our first album of the month. And yes, this is an October wrap-up video. However, I would like to start with one album from September that I really think is worth your time, and that is After Image by Hypergal. Hypergal are a Japanese no-wave pop duo, and they first came to my attention earlier this year because their previous album, Pure, was re-released via the record label Skingraft. Pure is an album that I actually reviewed for The Wire earlier in the year, and I mean it when I say I have never truly heard anything like this before. Hypergal's music always feels to me as though I'm watching some vintage advert on steroids. I know that's kind of hard to imagine as a song, but think about those jingles that get really stuck in your head and like bore into your brain and don't get out, and every time they happen they're like a little bit more warped. That's kind of what Hypergal's music sounds like to me, but in a good way. This music is truly deranged, but it's somehow still pop. There are hooks in this music that are super catchy. So catchy, in fact, that they go round and round in your brain until they stop making sense. Like when you repeat a word over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until it just becomes garbled mush. They take ideas and hyperfixate on them, often going out of time, continuing to fall further and further out of time until it comes back around again and then falls out of time again. Now, this album, After Image, is much less lo-fi than Pure was earlier in the year, which really sounded as though, you know, a cutlery drawer was falling down the stairs and being recorded on a potato. After Image has a little bit more slick production, but I really don't think that detracts from how bonkers the music is. Hypergal has been compared a lot in the past to the likes of Melt Banana. I kind of think that's just because they're both from Japan, because I don't really see the similarities, but if I was to compare them for a moment, I would say that Melt Banana are sort of the embodiment of ADHD as it is jumping around to different topics every millisecond or so. After Image and Hypergal in general feels like hyperfixation. They take one idea and just explore it until it no longer makes any sense. Ghost, for example, on After Image is a deranged waltz of a track punctuated by these very dry cymbals and recorded as if on an old gramophone sort of vibe. And then closing track, Ooh Parts, is kind of just one note with blast beats in the background that have been slowed down and then repeated incessantly over the course of a 6-minute track. Vocals often run frantically in and out of tune. Everything sort of sounds like it's being done by accident, but I don't think that's the case because there's something so compelling about this. It really sounds as though music is being done wrong, and that is fascinating to me. I really recommend Hypergal for something unlike anything you've ever heard of. It's not always the most pleasant listening experience, but it's definitely entertaining. After Image by Hypergal came out on the 13th of September, and I think you should listen if you're interested to hear so many musical rules being broken consistently and on every single track of this album, yet it still somehow manages to be pop. Fascinating stuff, really good to dance to. I'm seeing them live later this week, so I will report back. I'm expecting quite a show. I think this would be amazing live. It's so deranged, it's bonkers. I really can't think of anything that I've come across that sounds like them, and it's been one of my favourite discoveries of the year to come across this band, so very excited, highly recommend. The next album I have for you today is one that is perhaps a little bit more mainstream. You may have seen this one online somewhere, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because it is one of my favourite releases of the year, and that is See You at the Maypole by Halfwaif, which came out on the 4th of October via the label Anti. Now, trigger warning, this album is based on the emotions and grief that producer and songwriter Nandi Rose felt in the wake of a miscarriage. And also, I believe she lost, I think it was her stepmother as well, in a very similar kind of time frame. So this one is pretty heavy, but I wouldn't call it sad. It's a really hopeful album, but hope always seems as though it is delicate and fragile, that we have to tread very lightly around it. And I think she's done such a brilliant job of that. It's also an album that's very set in time and place. For example, the very first line of this album goes, "I will not despair this time of year." And the feeling of the changing of seasons runs throughout the whole album. On one of the last tracks, she says, "I never knew hope could be so like the spring." In the press text, she comments that she asked herself, how can I take the heaviest material of my life and make it feel like air? And I think that if that was her aim, she's nailed it. This album feels like listening to gossamer. It's so light and airy. It's so fragile. It's so delicate. It is determined to be hopeful and positive in the worst situations, and I think it really achieves all of those things so well. I've cried listening to this album. I think this album will really touch anyone who's been through a hard time and is determined or even struggling to see a way through. It sort of touches on both halves of that. You're allowed to struggle as long as you don't give up, and that's something that's really hard to get across in one album, but I think she really does a great job. There's also extracts of, I presume, voice notes that she's left for her husband and her loved ones throughout the album, and they really provide this kind of slice of life, this magic and beauty found in the everyday and the mundane after something so earth-shattering has happened to you. The track called Shirt Sleeves, which is just about sewing a button back onto someone's shirt and finding beauty and solace and calm in such a mundane action. It's an amazing album. Every time my partner hears me listening to this, she comments that it sounds like I'm listening to a Disney soundtrack. And I guess there is something a little bit musical theatre about it. It is a bit like, you know, I am the protagonist and I'm going out into the world to find this. I guess, what do they call that in musical theatre? Like the want song or something? I don't know. I was a theatre kid, but I didn't like musical theatre very much. So there is something that is a bit, I guess, self-absorbed about the album, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a bad thing. She's very self-aware, and she's coaching herself through these emotions, giving them validity, and yet knowing that they will pass and that spring will come. And I think it's amazing, and I really think that this is worth your time. If you're looking for a poignant, beautiful meditation on grief and the fragility of hope as it links to the seasons and getting over something that you one time thought that you would never get over, this is the album for you. It's been one of my favourites of the year, and I hope you enjoy it. The next release I have on my list is a recent addition for me and also a completely new artist, and that is the South Korean duo Daelim. Daelim translates to keep pursuing something, and the musicians in Daelim play two different types of traditional zithers, the Geyagium and the Geomungo. I have no idea if I said those right. But if you imagine, I guess I compared them to a hammered dulcimer, kind of, in my brain. They're sort of laid down, strung instruments, and I don't know very much about the history, so I'm not going to comment on that right now, but you should go check them out because they're really cool. And what you should look at for this band, if you look at anything, is the video for their song Cracking, which is an epic. It often feels like this duo are in some sort of guitar battle, or I guess it would be a zither battle. The way that they are shredding together and in opposition is truly mesmerizing. And I recommend the video because you can see it in progress. It is insane. The level of skills that these women have is amazing. There is definitely a sense of kind of unease and malintent on tracks like Cracking, which sort of murmurs and shifts in the background in a very uneasy kind of way. But there are also a lot more serene tracks on the album as well. Some of them remind me of rainfall or open plains and beautiful landscape. There's a line in the press text that compares some of these tracks to Chopin, which I completely understand because there is this feeling of a thunderstorm coming, gathering clouds and breaking clouds, and then it suddenly passing, and you get the calm after the storm as well. I'm actually going to read an extract from the press text now, which I think really displays the interplay between these two musicians much better than I ever could. English visual artist Cornelia Parker, whose fascination with opposites and transformations led her to mixing snake poison and its antidote with black and white inks. The interplay between the Geyagium and the Geomungo on the track Poison and Antidote finds the two musicians seemingly clawing at one another, then coming together to represent the writhing serpent itself. And that is the track that I feel like best represents the interplay between these two instruments and these two musicians. It is so satisfying to listen to because you can hear this call and response, and you can hear them coming together, writhing like snakes, like the poison and the antidote on the track. It is so well done. It is so satisfying to listen to. Daelim's Coexistence is out now, and I definitely recommend for people who want a bit more of a dramatic soundtrack for reading on a very rainy day, to be very specific. The next release I have on my list is The Shovel Dance by a band called The Shovel Dance Collective. They are almost more of an archival project rather than a band. They dig through past archives of folk songs to find stories told by voices of marginalised people, and that is often queer people and working class people in their case. The Shovel Dance was released on the 11th of October via American Dreams. On my first listen, I was slightly concerned because honestly, it really reminded me of their previous album, which was called The Water is the Shovel of the Shore, which is an incredible album and you should check it out if you like the sound of it. It was an anthology of songs about the River Thames. It really situates you in the middle of London at various points throughout history. I found it really interesting. Very catchy at points, very poignant, lots of water dripping noises, which kind of made me feel like I needed to pee the whole time, but like, it was worth it. Now, with The Shovel Dance, the new album that's just come out, I was slightly concerned at first because a lot of it really reminded me of the previous album, The Water is the Shovel of the Shore. There were some melodies that seemed to have been reused. There were some ideas that seemed to have been, you know, sort of dug up and rehashed. But then I got to thinking that's sort of the point of the band, is to take things from the past and repurpose them and make them new again for something new, a new project like this one. For example, on a track like The Merry Golden Tree, it definitely reuses a melody that I'm pretty sure was on the previous album. But I've sort of come around on the idea. I think that expanding on past ideas is this band's way of deepening their world building, which is something you definitely get a lot with this band. There is really like a whole world and a whole archive and lots of narratives that you can get stuck into that carry across the two recorded works that they've done and throughout lots of live performances as well. There is a ridiculous amount of voices and instruments on this album. I believe it was 20-something instruments and 8 voices, and it's really amazing to hear them all work together in harmony. I'm pretty sure this was recorded live because you can hear like the little noises of people playing and people taking breaths throughout, which really makes the record feel like it is a living, breathing thing, which definitely adds to this element of like, it's a folk group that you're hearing, you're like stumbling across them in a market square in the olden times, you know, it feels very, very real and very human. There's a whole track on this album with the lyric, "Some say that kissing's a sin," and it's sort of about why can't queer people love each other, which I love. It's really beautiful to hear that sort of narrative being used in this way and performed by so many queer people. And there's quite a lot of a cappella passages as well on this album, which leads all of these beautiful voices to sing together. And one of the lyrics that really got me, again, was from the same song, which goes, "Why can I not love my love?" Which felt very emotional for me as a queer person. They also touch on more spooky folk tales on songs like The Grey Cock, which really reminded me of the behemoth that is Lankum, another massive band in the folk revival. If you haven't heard of Lankum, we'll cover them at some point. There were elements on this album that reminded me of the likes of Scott Walker and Swans as well, two artists that the press text compares them to, and I really do get that. They use a lot of very old references but give a very modern experimental interpretation of them. The press text calls this melding past and present to transcend linear time, which is pretty cool. I think it's something that they achieve. Listening to this album is a very timeless experience. It feels like you're connecting with the past at the same time as being involved in a musical world that feels very modern and relevant. And yeah, I really recommend this album. I would recommend this for a board game night with your friends, as I believe that is how the collective first got started. The last album I have for you guys today is another one that's perhaps a tad more mainstream. It's being released on a rather big metal label, and that is Mun Tau Tuja by Oranzi Pazuzu. You have never heard metal like this before. The guitarist Icon described in an interview with Consequence of Sound that his band make music that is nightmarish rave music. And I mean, I think that's a perfect description and my job is done, really. Okay, bye! No, I'm kidding. We're going to talk about it more, but that is truly what I think of when I think of Oranssi Pazuzu. I think of those, like, sweaty clubs in the Matrix films, and I think of like being on all the wrong drugs in the wrong place at the wrong time, but like in a cool way. Yeah, I've been following this band since they released their 2020 album Mester and Kinsey, which was one of my favourite albums from that year, and that was a strong year for music. This band is so good at what I'm going to call a metal drop. It's not a breakdown and it's not a drop in the traditional electronic music sense, but because they meld electronic music using electronic sensibilities, the textures that build and release are so much more intense than you would get from like a gritty guitar on its own, for example. Like, it really feels that something menacing and sinister is happening or is about to happen. The amount of tension and release that this band creates is just phenomenal. I really think you have to hear them to believe it. And I think one of the best examples of that metal drop is in a song like on the title track of this album. They're often described as being a sort of cosmic horror band, which I do agree with, but it's sort of missing a big point of Oranssi Pazuzu's music, which is that it's actually really good to dance to. Like, it's scary, yes, but it's also so fun. The track Valatos is the one that most reminds me of their work on the previous album. You get these swirling time signatures that seem to collapse in on themselves. You get this maelstrom of harsh vocals, and the guy who sings in this band really sounds like he is throwing up his guts every time he says anything. Yeah, it might not be for everyone, but I think it really adds to the atmosphere personally. You get this overwhelming noise and synths as well, all mixed into the traditional metal elements that you'd have in a metal band. And I believe the album title translates to mutation or transformation. And I definitely feel like we're getting something akin to like The Thing, the horror film, where your body sort of betrays you and you turn into something that's impossible to describe. This grotesque metamorphosis, the growing pains of transforming into something beyond comprehension in this or any other galaxy. It really sounds alien. At the very end of this album, the whole sound just collapses and crushes into this feeling that is like you're being held in the grasp of a merciless god. And as I said before, it's scary, but it's also really, really fun. It's very apocalyptic kind of feeling, but that is in a sort of throw caution to the wind sort of way, as well as like end of the world way, you know? It feels like, you know, it is time for the world to end, but we're gonna go down partying. And that was Mun Tau Tuja by Oranssi Pazuzu, and that came out on the 11th of October. And that is all the albums that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching to the end. To recap, there were 5 albums, and that was Hypergal's After Image, Half Waifs, See You at the Maypole, Dalem's Coexistence, the Shovel Dance Collective's The Shovel Dance, and Oranssi Pazuzu's Mun Tau Tuja. I'm still not sure if I'm saying that last one right at all. I'll have links to all of the albums below in the description box so that you can buy the albums and support the artists. As I said before, I really would appreciate any respectful and kind feedback that you have in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please let me know in the comments. Please subscribe if you fancy it. I'm hoping to bring more entertaining and informative videos your way. If you have any ideas of genres or scenes or topics in music that you would like me to explore, please leave a note in the comments below. I would really appreciate connecting with you guys. And yeah, I hope to see you very soon in my next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye, friends.